I wake up every morning in the bustling heart of the city, a place where dreams weave into the fabric of skyscrapers and the rhythm of life never slows down. My name is Angie, a woman caught in the whirlwind of a metropolitan existence. My days are spent navigating the concrete jungle, a stark contrast to the suburban tranquility I once knew. My husband, a man of ambition and success, is constantly on the move. His career demands his presence in boardrooms and executive suites across the globe. The glossy magazines paint us as a power couple, our lives intertwined in a glamorous dance of corporate events and high society gatherings. However, behind the polished facade lies a truth that even the most discerning eyes might overlook. My marriage is a grand spectacle of distance and detachment. His absence, a byproduct of professional triumphs, has become a familiar companion in my daily routine. Breakfasts alone, dinners for one, and the echo of empty hallways. These are the symphonies that accompany my solitude. The spacious penthouse we call home is but a luxurious shell devoid of the warmth that a marriage should emanate. In the evenings, as the sun dips below the skyline, casting hues of orange and pink across the cityscape, I find myself yearning for a connection that transcends the emptiness within these opulent walls. The echo of footsteps and the hum of city life are my constant companions, yet I crave the intimacy that eludes me within the confines of my marriage. It was on one of those evenings, a twilight that seemed to hold the promise of change, that our paths converged. His name was Daniel, an 18-year-old beacon of youth and vitality. The contrast between us was striking, his exuberance against my world-weary demeanor. He was a breath of fresh air, a gust of wind that threatened to topple the carefully constructed edifice of my reality. Our meeting was serendipitous, a collision of two worlds that shouldn't have intersected. He was a barista in a quaint coffee shop I stumbled upon, seeking solace in the aroma of freshly ground beans. Our eyes met, and in that brief exchange, I felt a spark, a recognition of something dormant within me. As he handed me a cup of coffee, our fingers brushed, igniting a flame that flickered in the recesses of my suppressed desires. He was an escape from the monotony, a respite from the solitude that defined my existence. Little did I know that this chance encounter would unravel the threads of restraint woven into the tapestry of my life. In the subsequent days, I found myself drawn to the coffee shop, an oasis where time seemed to stand still. Conversations flowed effortlessly, laughter became a melody, and in the warmth of his company, I discovered a side of myself that had long been dormant. Daniel was a key that unlocked a door to a realm of emotions I had deemed unreachable. As the city lights shimmered outside the coffee shop's window, I couldn't shake the realization that life, in all its chaotic beauty, was urging me to redefine my narrative. Little did I know that this budding connection with Daniel would evolve into a complex tapestry of infidelity, love, and passion, a journey that would alter the course of my existence. Days turned into nights of complicity. Daniel and I entered into a dangerous game, a tangle of secrets woven between clandestine sheets. Our encounters, initially innocent, turned into a labyrinth of desire and occultism. Each shared moment was a stolen exhalation in a world where only he and I existed. Our first clandestine encounters took place in discreet hotels, secluded corners of the city that kept our secrets. Each room became a sanctuary where reality faded and was reborn in the complicity of passion. The dim lights and complicit shadows created an intimate setting, a backdrop for the whispers and gasps that became the melody of our complicity. The first time our gazes were lost in the maelstrom of passion, I knew there was no turning back. Daniel, with his 18 impetuous years, became my accomplice in the art of losing himself in ecstasy. Every caress, every kiss, was an act of rebellion against the routine that shackled my married life. His hands, young and determined, explored every corner of my skin, unearthing sensations that lay dormant in the penumbra of my existence. Our encounters multiplied, and the urgency of clandestinity fanned the flame of our forbidden connection. We discovered secret hideouts, corner after corner, where the limits of morality were blurred. The city became a silent accomplice of our debauchery, its streets and alleys silent witnesses of a furtive love. Each of those moments was charged with an intensity that, although ephemeral, left an indelible mark. Daniel, with his fiery youth, and I, with my repressed desire, formed a symphony of passion that echoed in the shadows. In those moments, the outside world disappeared, and only we existed, caught in a whirlwind of emotions that knew no bounds. However, with each encounter, the weight of reality intensified. My married life, a structure I had once considered immovable, began to crack. The lies became heavy, the deception a shadow that loomed over my conscience. The ecstasy of our encounters intertwined with the agony of betrayal, creating a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Angie, the woman once drowning in the loneliness of her marriage, became a version of herself slipping on the edge of self-destruction. Passion with Daniel became an escape, but also a labyrinth she didn't know how to get out of. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise became links in a chain that threatened to drag me into darkness. As the passion intensified, so did the unanswered questions. How far was I willing to go? What price would I pay for these stolen moments of ephemeral bliss? The answers lurked in the midst of the uncertain future, as passion and guilt danced in precarious balance in Angie's heart. A woman caught between forbidden love and the reality that threatened to crumble. The days slipped by like fleeting chapters of an intense novel. The passion with Daniel became more ardent, but also more dangerous. In the midst of the maelstrom of emotions, an unexpected twist shook our clandestine narrative. One afternoon, while the city slept in its daily routine, I received a call that made my heart pound with a mixture of terror and excitement. It was my husband, announcing his anticipated return. The news echoed in my ears like an ominous echo, and panic gripped me. The hotel rooms and secret alleys we had explored were no longer safe havens. Desperation drove me to make impulsive decisions. In a desperate attempt to hide our history, Daniel and I ventured into even more dangerous terrain. Furtive encounters now took place in public places, among anonymous crowds who at first glance would not suspect the storm of secrets brewing. The vertigo of the situation intensified our emotions. Each kiss, each caress, became an act of rebellion against the destiny that threatened to separate us. Furtive glances and stolen touches became the essence of our forbidden relationship, a frenetic choreography executed on the edge of madness. However, chaos soon ensued. In one of our encounters in broad daylight, we witnessed a scene that chilled the blood in my veins. My husband, in the very place where Daniel and I were indulging in passion. The world crumbled around me as I tried to hide my face, but it was too late. Confrontation was inevitable. My husband, with eyes that reflected a mixture of disappointment and pain, looked at me as if he had discovered a secret that even I didn't fully understand. Daniel, for his part, faced reality with an expression that oscillated between bravery and despair. The words exchanged at that moment were sharp daggers that cut through lies and illusion. Tears of betrayal, fiery accusations, and broken promises created a bleak landscape in which the foundations of my life crumbled. Angie's story, marked by passion and infidelity, had taken a chaotic and unexpected turn. The forbidden love I saw as a balm for loneliness became a gale that swept everything in its path. I found myself caught in a whirlwind of mixed emotions, struggling with the consequences of my impulsive decisions. In the chaos, fleeting happiness vanished, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. Angie's story, once navigating the shadows of desire and passion, now faced the consequences of her choices on a tumultuous journey that took her to unexplored places and an uncertain destination. The revelation of the betrayal left my husband, plunged into despair and madness in a state of emotional imbalance. The news detonated in him a downward spiral of anger and hopelessness. Lost looks and erratic gestures became his new reality as he clung to the ledge of his crumbling sanity. His threats and impulsive outbursts plunged me into a state of constant fear. The successful, aloof man who was once my husband faded away, making room for a being tormented by betrayal and loss. Every day was a dangerous dance on the edge of the precipice, where reality and fiction blended in a frenzied dance. The tension peaked when I discovered that my husband was on the verge of committing an irrational act. I found him gazing into the abyss from the top of our luxurious apartment, his frail figure against the backdrop of the illuminated city. Fear gripped me, and I ran toward him, screaming at him to back away. In that moment of desperation, tears blended with the rain that began to fall. My pleas echoed in the air as I struggled to keep him away from the edge. It was a clash between the madness unleashed by betrayal and the desire to cling to life. On the precipice of destruction, reality seemed to fracture, creating a space where life's unexpected twists and turns became inevitable. As the drama reached its climax, Angie's story took an unpredictable direction. The unexpected twist not only involved the struggle for emotional survival, but also opened a door to redemption and transformation. The impending intervention of tragedy led to an abrupt change in the dynamics of the story. My husband, recognizing the magnitude of the storm that had been unleashed in his life, was forced to face reality. The line between victim and victimizer blurred, and we found ourselves, in a way, united in shared vulnerability. It was at this moment of breakdown that Angie's story turned to a path of introspection and reconstruction. Chaotic emotions, secrets, and betrayal became a catalyst for redemption. My husband, scared by hopelessness, found a spark of inner strength to heal. The story, which began as a tale of infidelity and passion, took an unexpected turn toward redemption and forgiveness. The denouement of the plot was not a closed ending, but an invitation to explore the complexities of human nature and the possibility of transformation through pain and compassion. Although the initial chaos faded and the storm found an unusual calm, Angie and Daniel's emotions remained a turbulent tide. We closed that chapter with the realization that our lives would no longer be the same. The clandestine encounters, forbidden whispers, and shared madness were behind us, but the emotional scars remained. Daniel, her 18 years brimming with youth and vitality, faced reality with a mixture of regret and longing. The weight of betrayal and conscience marked her expression. But there was also a spark of liberation, as if the closure of this stage had shed light on a deeper truth. Angie, on the other hand, was discovering that the past was still weaving invisible threads in her present. Despite the months that had passed, thoughts of the encounters with Daniel continued to haunt her in moments of silence. Images of those stolen moments continued to dance in her mind, igniting her with a mixture of excitement and guilt. The nights were witness to her wandering thoughts, and though daily reality moved forward, Angie found herself trapped in a kind of emotional purgatory. The spark of passion that ignited those forbidden encounters persisted, like a flame that, despite the winds of rationality, refused to extinguish. The question that echoed within her was a persistent echo: how to close that chapter and move on. How to bury the memories that clung to her skin like emotional tattoos? The story was left open-ended, without a definitive ending, leaving room to ponder the complexities of love, loyalty, and temptation. Then, in a whisper in the wind, the narrative faded into uncertainty. Angie and Daniel's story was suspended in an emotional limbo, and the future became a blank canvas waiting to be filled by the decisions they would make in the days to come. Thus concludes the story of Angie, a woman caught between the mirages of desire and reality, forging her destiny at a crossroads where love, drama, and madness intertwine in an unpredictable dance. Would you close that chapter of passion and despair, or would you succumb to the temptation to continue exploring the dark corners of desire? The answer is left to your imagination, an unwritten epilogue that adds a touch of mystery to Angie and Daniel's complex plot.
The soft glow of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a warm golden hue across the room. I lay there, nestled under the sheets, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. My name is Julia, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn. I had always been the quintessential girl next door, with a life that seemed almost too perfect. My husband, Michael, and I lived in a quaint suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other and life moved at a leisurely pace. We had been married for 8 years, and to the outside world, we were the ideal couple. Michael was a successful architect, and I worked as a freelance graphic designer from our cozy 2-story home. Physically, I guess I was what people would call conventionally attractive. I had long, chestnut hair that fell in loose waves down my back, and my eyes were a deep shade of green that people often said were my most striking feature. I wasn't overly tall, standing at about 5'6", and I had always been quite athletic, thanks to my love for morning jogs and yoga. Our home was my sanctuary. I had poured my heart into every corner of it, decorating it with a mix of modern and vintage pieces that somehow worked together to create a warm, inviting space. Our garden was my pride and joy, a burst of color and life that mirrored my own passion for the outdoors. Life with Michael was comfortable, if somewhat predictable. Our routines were well established. He would leave for work early, and I would spend my days working on various design projects, occasionally meeting with clients, but mostly communicating through emails and video calls. Evenings were our time together, either spent in quiet companionship at home or out with friends. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, there was a restlessness growing within me. I loved Michael, but over the years, our relationship had settled into a companionship more than a passionate partnership. We were like two pieces of a well-oiled machine, functioning together seamlessly, yet somehow lacking the spark that once ignited our hearts. The first time I truly met Alex, it was an unexpectedly warm spring morning. The kind of day when the air is fragrant with blooming flowers and the promise of summer is just around the corner. I remember tying my running shoes, stepping out the door, and feeling a sense of anticipation, though I couldn't quite place why. As I jogged down the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I saw him. Alex was in his front yard, tending to a small but vibrant flower bed that bordered his quaint, somewhat rustic-looking house. He was tall, perhaps a little over 6 feet, with a lean, athletic build that was noticeable even from a distance. His hair was a sandy brown, slightly tousled, giving him a carefree, almost boyish charm. There was something about his relaxed, easy manner as he worked with the plants that piqued my curiosity. As I approached, our eyes met. He looked up from his gardening, a smile breaking across his face, revealing a set of perfectly imperfect teeth that somehow added to his appeal. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, sparkled with a kind of lively intelligence. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans, which were slightly stained with soil. "Good morning," he called out, his voice warm and inviting. I slowed down, coming to a stop. "Good morning," I replied, feeling a flutter of something I couldn't quite identify in my stomach. "I see you're settling in nicely." "Yeah, trying to," Alex chuckled. "I find working with plants is a great way to start the day. It's peaceful, you know." I nodded, finding myself drawn into the conversation. "I agree. There's something about nurturing life that's incredibly rewarding." He leaned on his garden fork, looking genuinely interested. "Are you into gardening?" "A bit," I said, smiling. "I have a garden of my own back at my place." "That's great. I could use some tips from a fellow green thumb." We chatted for a few more minutes, mostly about gardening and the neighborhood. I learned that Alex had recently moved in after taking a new job in the city. He was an engineer, which somehow didn't surprise me given his practical yet creative approach to his garden. As our conversation wound down, I realized I had been there longer than I intended. "I should get going," I said, feeling a tinge of reluctance. "It was nice meeting you, Alex." "Likewise, Julia," he replied, his smile lingering. "I'm sure I'll see you around." As I resumed my jog, I couldn't help but glance back. Alex was watching me, a thoughtful expression on his face. There was an undeniable connection, a spark of something new and exciting. But at that moment, it was nothing more than a fleeting, innocent interaction. Little did I know how significant Alex would become in my life. Over the next few weeks, my interactions with Alex gradually evolved from casual neighborly exchanges to something deeper, something that began to stir the dormant passions within me. Each encounter with him was like adding fuel to a fire I hadn't known was burning. Our meetings were initially coincidental. A shared moment while collecting mail, a brief chat during my morning jog. But as days slipped into weeks, these chance encounters felt less like coincidence and more like the subtle pull of an unseen magnet. Alex's easy charm and engaging conversation became highlights of my day, bright spots in the comfortable yet increasingly monotonous tapestry of my married life. Michael, my husband, remained the same loving, dependable partner he had always been, but our conversations seemed to lack the spark that Alex's words ignited in me. With Michael, discussions were about household matters, work, and the occasional social engagement, important, yet lacking a certain depth. In contrast, my conversations with Alex were spontaneous, filled with laughter, shared interests, and a growing sense of mutual understanding. One evening, as Michael worked late, Alex invited me over for a casual dinner. It was meant to be a friendly gesture between neighbors, but as we cooked together in his kitchen, laughing over a shared love of Italian cuisine, I felt a connection that was undeniable. There was an electricity in the air, a palpable tension that both frightened and excited me. The more time I spent with Alex, the more I found myself drawn to his zest for life, his passion for his interests, and the way he listened intently, making me feel heard and understood. He had this remarkable ability to make the mundane feel extraordinary, and I found myself eagerly anticipating our next encounter. As the weeks passed, my feelings for Alex deepened. The rational part of me was aware of the dangerous path I was treading, yet I felt powerless to resist the allure. With Alex, I felt the passion and vibrancy that had been missing from my life for years. He made me feel alive, desired, and exhilaratingly reckless. Simultaneously, my relationship with Michael began to feel increasingly distant. I found myself going through the motions, maintaining the facade of a happy, devoted wife, but inside, I was conflicted. Guilt gnawed at me whenever I shared a meal with Michael or lay beside him at night. Yet the thrill of my secret life with Alex was intoxicating. Our encounters became more frequent and intense, and with each meeting, I felt myself slipping further away from the woman I once was. The boundary between right and wrong blurred, overshadowed by a torrent of emotion and desire. Alex and I shared stolen moments that were a mix of exhilaration and madness, a heady cocktail that left me craving more. I was living a double life, torn between the stability and love I had with Michael and the fiery passion I found in Alex's arms. The contrast between my two worlds was stark, and with each passing day, the strain of keeping them separate grew heavier. It was a precipice I never thought I'd find myself on, teetering between duty and desire, reason and recklessness. But there I was, caught in the throes of an affair that was as intoxicating as it was destructive. A secret dance of shadows that threatened to consume everything I held dear. As the weeks slipped by, each secret rendezvous with Alex became increasingly shadowed by an overwhelming sense of guilt. The initial thrill of our encounters gave way to a deep, gnawing remorse that clung to me long after our meetings. I began to see the stark contrast between the fleeting moments of passion with Alex and the enduring, if somewhat dulled, love I shared with Michael. The realization that I was betraying not just my husband, but the vows we had made to each other weighed heavily on my conscience. The guilt manifested in small ways at first: sleepless nights, a lack of appetite, an inability to meet Michael's gaze without feeling a surge of shame. I became more withdrawn, lost in a sea of my own conflicted emotions. Michael noticed the change in me, his concern evident in his gentle inquiries about my well-being, which only served to deepen my guilt. As the days passed, the idea of confessing my infidelity to Michael began to take root in my mind. It loomed over me, an inevitable storm on the horizon. I was torn between the fear of hurting him and the desperate need to unburden myself of the secret that was slowly consuming me. The night I confessed, it was raining heavily, a relentless downpour that seemed to mirror the turmoil in my heart. Michael and I were sitting in the living room, the sound of the rain a steady backdrop to our quiet evening. We had opened a bottle of wine, a futile attempt on my part to find some solace in the familiar ritual. As we talked, the conversation lapsed into comfortable silence. Michael was watching me with a soft, concerned expression, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't carry the weight of my secret any longer. The words tumbled out in a rush, my voice trembling with emotion. I confessed everything: the affair with Alex, the guilt, the confusion, the fear of losing him. Michael's reaction was a complex tapestry of emotions. There was hurt in his eyes, a deep, piercing kind of pain that made me flinch. He was silent for a long time, processing the magnitude of what I had just revealed. I could see him struggling to reconcile the image of the woman he thought he knew with the reality of my betrayal. Then there was anger, a flash of it in his eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound sadness. He asked questions, his voice steady but laced with a palpable sense of betrayal. How long it had been going on, why I did it, if I still loved him. As I answered, my own tears mingled with the sound of the rain, each word a confirmation of the pain I had caused. Michael listened, his expression one of someone who had been irrevocably wounded. In the end, His response was not one of immediate forgiveness or a rash decision to end our marriage. Instead, there was a quiet, resigned understanding. He didn't lash out or raise his voice. He simply sat there, a man coming to terms with a reality he had never imagined. That night marked the beginning of a long, difficult journey for us. The confession, though painful, was a necessary step towards facing the consequences of my actions. It was a moment of reckoning, a turning point that would define the future of our marriage and the path I had to take to try and heal the wounds I had inflicted. In the wake of my confession, my world was steeped in a tumult of emotions, a relentless tide that ebbed and flowed with doubts and uncertainties. The revelation of my affair with Alex had left deep, jagged scars in the fabric of my marriage. Michael's willingness to work through the betrayal and rebuild our relationship was a testament to the depth of his love and commitment, but it also cast a stark light on the magnitude of my own failings. The days that followed were a blur of introspection and uneasy conversations. I grappled with a maelstrom of feelings: remorse for the pain I had caused Michael, lingering affection for Alex, and a profound confusion about what I truly wanted. The simplicity of my life before the affair seemed like a distant memory, and I yearned for that sense of clarity and purpose. It was during these long days of reflection that I came to a decision, one that I knew was necessary, not just for the sake of my marriage, but for my own sense of integrity. I had to end the affair with Alex. The realization that I could not continue living a lie was both painful and liberating. I needed to face the consequences of my actions and attempt to mend what I had broken. The conversation with Alex was one of the hardest I had ever had. He was understanding, yet there was a sense of loss that hung heavily between us. We both knew that what we had started was wrong, built on a foundation of deceit and unfulfilled desires. Ending it was the right thing to do, but that knowledge did little to ease the sense of grief that accompanied our goodbye. Turning my focus back to Michael and our marriage was a journey fraught with challenges. There were days when the weight of my guilt felt unbearable, and the path to forgiveness seemed insurmountable. But Michael's steadfast support, his willingness to work through the hurt and rebuild our bond, was a guiding light in the darkness. We sought counseling, a step that allowed us to navigate the complexities of our emotions and the dynamics of our relationship with the help of a professional. It was a process that required honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and each other. As I write this, the future of our marriage remains a question mark, a story still being written. The scars of the affair are still there, slowly healing with time and effort. The love I have for Michael is a constant, but it is now interwoven with a newfound understanding of the fragility of trust and the consequences of our choices. I don't know what the future holds for us, whether our marriage will emerge stronger from this ordeal, or whether the cracks will eventually lead to an unbridgeable divide. All I know is that I am committed to facing that future with honesty and a willingness to work for the love that still exists between us. Only time will reveal the final chapter of our story, a narrative shaped by choices, consequences, and the unpredictable nature of the human heart. Did you like my story? What would you have done? You can answer in the comments, and feel free to like the video and subscribe for more personal stories. Thank you.
Relaxed in bed after an exhausting day. That night, we had a dialogue that would completely transform our world. But for you to understand better, I must first introduce myself. My name is Julia, and at that crucial moment in my life, I was 39 years old. My partner, Jason, was 45 years old. We had a 6-year-old daughter just beginning her school years, and we loved her deeply. As for our intimacy, I must admit that I was fully satisfied, feeling complete with Jason in my world. Since I was young, I had been considered very attractive, and this perception was maintained thanks to my personal and physical care. I constantly received compliments, which was a point of security for me. And the best thing was that Jason had never shown jealousy. He was a confident man and sometimes encouraged me to dress more boldly, which made me feel desired, although sometimes also uncomfortable due to the environment or prying eyes. Our love story began at work when we were both in our 30s. Since then, we became inseparable, living experiences that strengthened our relationship. We had always maintained a closed and traditional relationship, although we were open to experiencing new things, always as a couple and without third parties. This is where things take an unexpected turn. I must mention Roy, Jason's best friend since childhood, who would eventually introduce me to a world that I had never explored in my private life. They both considered themselves brothers, although now I doubt if one brother would act like that with the other's wife. I knew Roy from the beginning of my relationship with Jason, and I will not deny that he was a very attractive man. Over time, he even became more handsome than Jason, taking care of his figure and style. My relationship with Roy had always been cordial and common, without romantic or physical inclinations. Despite his attractiveness, Martin did not seem like the suitable man for a serious relationship, as he was known for his inability to maintain stable relationships. He was intelligent and educated, but known for being a Casanova. I even remember one occasion when I had to reason with a friend who fell at her feet. Personally, although Martin was fun and attractive, I never saw him in a different light, until everything changed that day. Now let's go back to that night when Jason and I had that momentous conversation in bed. Our daughter was sleeping in the next room, so I prepared to get intimate with Jason and relieve us of stress. However, that night was different. Jason, unusually tired, preferred to talk about something personal. In that conversation, he revealed to me a fantasy he had had for years and hadn't been able to get out of his mind. His wish was to see me with someone else. He explained to me that this fantasy had come from his youth and that he had always wanted to share it with his partner. He assured me that if I refused, there would be no problem. Initially, I flatly refused his proposal, thinking he was playing with me, and I went to sleep upset that night. But the next day, Jason's request continued to echo in my head. On the one hand, I was afraid that our marriage would be in danger if I didn't fulfill his request, and on the other, I wondered if it would really be a bad thing to fulfill his fantasy. I started to look at the situation from different angles, and after researching the internet, I realized that it was more common than I thought. A week and a few more days passed, and we had a second conversation. This time, I wanted to make sure that Jason truly loved me and didn't just see me as an object to satisfy his desires. In that talk, Jason convinced me of his love and told me about the different fantasies that many couples have around the world. He assured me that he would not feel jealous and that he would always be by my side no matter what. Many things went through my head at that moment. Throughout my life, thanks to my appearance, I had received numerous proposals from attractive men, which I rejected out of loyalty to Jason. So when he so naturally asked me to meet other men, my whole reality began to blur together. Besides him, she had never felt sentimental attraction for another man, although physically she had for many. In fact, that was the last phrase I said to Jason before that unexpected happened. Jason, I don't know if jokingly or seriously, while looking at the ground smiling, mentioned that his good friend Roy could be a good option to start with. I stared at him wide-eyed, wondering if he was serious or joking, until he changed the subject and mentioned that it wasn't necessary to fulfill his fantasy right away and that I could take my time finding someone I liked. I reproached him that he had not yet accepted and that he was not even attracted to another man at that moment, even denying that he could feel something like that for someone other than him. However, Jason established some conditions that I had to follow if I decided to fulfill his fantasy. No more than 2 meetings with the same person, avoid men he knew, not get romantically involved, or keep his phone numbers, and tell them in detail about my adventures. After that conversation, and also out of a bit of fear of losing him, I accepted his proposal, but with one condition. I would take my time to find someone new. Thus, I tried to get Jason to forget that fantasy a little and focus on maintaining our traditional relationship, although I finally ended up giving in. A little over a month and a half passed, and I assured Jason that I still had not found someone who caught my attention, something that I noticed was beginning to bother him. Although I must admit that he always tried to hide that discomfort like a gentleman, making it clear to me that I was in control of the situation. So when Roy arrived at my door, I knew it was a sign from the universe. Even though one of Jason's conditions had been not to get involved with anyone he knew, when a woman is given certain freedoms, it can awaken a beast that can't be controlled. So, without further ado, my secret story with my husband's best friend begins. The story began on a Sunday afternoon, a day when Jason was not at home, as he used to visit his family and spend the afternoon with them. In my case, my parents lived in Europe with my older sister, so some Sundays I would accompany Jason to lunch with my in-laws, but on other occasions I would make up some excuse to sleep all afternoon. An important fact is that by chance, Roy lived in the same area as Jason and me. Until that day, he had rarely deigned to visit us. Another relevant fact is that my little daughter had gone to visit her grandparents with Jason, so I had the house to myself and my new companion. As I told you, it was more or less 3 in the afternoon. The day was cloudy, as I like, and with a quite refreshing cold breeze. I was wearing a long dress that covered my entire body while lying on the couch in the living room. Suddenly, I heard the door of the house begin to ring, knocked with slight insistence by what seemed to be a man. I got up and looked out the window, realizing that it was none other than Roy. At that moment, I thought that he had surely come to visit Jason to have a few drinks or invite him to play soccer. The only thing I did was open the first floor window and start talking to him, that is, while Roy was on the street and I was inside my house. However, my surprise was great when in that short conversation, Roy told me that he really needed to come into my house because Jason had forgotten to give him some shoes that I had lent him a few days ago. Since it was Roy, I had no problem letting him pick up said shoes in Jason's room, since I had every reason to do so. In fact, as I entered my house and accompanied him to Jason's room, Roy told me that he had been trying to call Jason for about 2 hours, but that his cell phone was out of charge. I remember that when he mentioned that, I put my hands on my head, remembering that this had always been Jason's great defect all his life. Once we arrived at my double room on the 3rd floor of the house, I carelessly told him that he could look for Jason's shoes in that bottom drawer while pointing my finger at him. But my face turned red when Roy, instead of opening the shoebox, opened a box that was on the side, which had a lot of private toys that I used to use in the bed next to Jason. It was inevitable to let out a slight cry of shame when seeing that Roy stayed for a few seconds looking at that drawer in surprise without understanding where the damn shoes were.